You really think no one sees you here? Eleanor Harper's voice cut through the quiet hall like a sharp wind, echoing off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Lily Harper froze mid-step, her cleaning rag clenched tightly in her hand, a drop of water sliding down the edge of the silver tray she had been carrying. The mansion's east wing was bathed in cold morning light that filtered through tall windows, dust motes floating lazily, glinting like tiny stars in the beams. Lily's eyes darted briefly to the grand staircase where Charles Whitman, Eleanor's husband, stood, hands tucked into his tailored suit pockets, an expression of mild curiosity on his face as he surveyed the bustling staff. Every step she took seemed amplified in the vast space, her polished shoes clicking softly against the marble, each sound drawing subtle glances from the maids and butlers passing by. Her pulse quickened not from fear but from the weight of what she had just noticed, a discrepancy in the delivery logs that could unravel the schedule for the entire household, a detail no one else had caught yet. She had always been observant, the kind of child who noticed the faintest patterns, the quietest irregularities, often dismissed by adults as inconsequential, invisible. And yet today, the tiny difference seemed monumental, a hidden truth hovering in plain sight. Eleanor's sharp heels clattered down the corridor, the sound slicing through the ambient hum of distant conversation and the faint whir of the chandelier motor overhead. She paused at the top of the hall, glancing at Lily with a raised brow and a smirk that conveyed both amusement and mild disdain. Still polishing floors? Or are you going to actually be useful today? The words stung, but Lily didn't flinch. She inhaled slowly, the scent of polished wood and faint citrus cleaner grounding her, and reminded herself that being overlooked had been her shield for years. Invisibility had a way of keeping her safe, but it also meant that when the moment came to step forward, her voice, though soft, carried the weight of attention that no one expected. Lily bent slightly, picking up a misplaced folder, her fingers brushing over the embossed cover with care as she traced the title with her eyes, scanning the first few lines, and the realization struck her fully. A single missed entry, a misalignment in the record, something that would seem trivial to anyone else but could cascade into a problem no one in the household could ignore. Eleanor's laughter rang again, brittle and dismissive, echoing off the walls, and Lily straightened, holding the folder against her chest, her heartbeat steadying into a deliberate rhythm. She knew that speaking up now would draw scrutiny, perhaps disbelief, but also that it was the only way to ensure the mansion ran as it should, that the truth, though hidden in plain sight, would finally be acknowledged. Every second stretched, the light shifting slightly as clouds passed outside, the distant tick of an antique clock punctuating the stillness, and in that suspended moment, Lily Harper, the maid's daughter, prepared to make herself seen. The hallway seemed to hold its breath as Lily Harper stepped cautiously toward the grand study, the soft hum of the chandelier blending with the faint rustle of curtains swaying in the morning breeze. Each polished marble tile reflected a muted glow that danced across the walls lined with dark oak paneling, the scent of lemon polish lingering in the air. Eleanor Harper's heels had retreated down the corridor, but the tension she left behind seemed to cling to the space, like a shadow watching every movement. Lily adjusted the folder against her side, feeling the weight of both the paper and the invisible expectations pressing down. She paused near the towering bookcases, where sunlight filtered through the tall arched windows, casting long, angular patterns across the floor, and listened. From the other side of the room, Charles Whitman's presence was quiet but undeniable, a low hum of authority that radiated from his posture and the measured tap of his watch against the desk edge. The household staff went about their routines in silence, the soft shuffle of shoes and occasional clink of silverware marking the distance between them and the tension at the center of the room. Lily's gaze fell upon a small, overlooked corner of the study where a stack of delivery logs lay slightly askew, a single page protruding in a way that seemed almost intentional, catching her attention immediately. Her fingers moved instinctively, brushing over the smooth surface as she scanned the entries, and the realization settled like a cold light across her mind. A misalignment in the schedule could lead to confusion, a chain reaction that no one had noticed until now. Her breath slowed, deliberate, matching the careful rhythm of her movements, as she straightened to face the room, every inch of her posture conveying quiet determination. Charles shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as they tracked her, curiosity sparking where indifference had been moments before. The chandeliers overhead swayed ever so slightly with the draft from the open windows, the prisms scattering light that caught in Lily's hair, giving her an almost ethereal presence amid the orderly opulence. She cleared her throat gently, a soft sound that somehow carried across the study, drawing subtle attention without breaking the decorum of the room. Lily lifted the top sheet of the folder and placed it deliberately on the desk, the edges aligning with precision, and spoke in a calm, measured voice. There is a discrepancy here that could affect the sequence of deliveries for the entire household. The words seemed to hang in the space between them, rippling through the air as Charles raised his hand slightly, tilting his head, his expression betraying a flicker of interest and a hint of concern. For the briefest moment, Eleanor appeared at the doorway again, her posture rigid, observing Lily with an unreadable expression that blended surprise and irritation. The sunlight shifted, illuminating the page Lily had indicated, the small ink marks and misaligned numbers suddenly seeming to demand recognition, and the study felt suspended, time stretching around them, holding each person in quiet anticipation. Lily took a small step back, maintaining her composure, letting the gravity of the discovery resonate, aware that she had captured the attention of everyone who mattered, the invisible thread of authority subtly redirecting toward her. The staff moved quietly around them, performing their duties as though they had been caught in a tableau, each motion deliberate, restrained, acknowledging the tension without intrusion. The distant ticking of a wall clock seemed to synchronize with Lily's pulse as she observed Charles leaning forward slightly, reviewing the highlighted page, the first hints of acknowledgement softening the initial rigidity of his expression. Shadows from the towering bookshelves shifted slowly across the floor, lending a sense of drama to the stillness, while Lily remained poised, knowing that her careful observation and quiet intervention had begun to stir the calm order of the mansion, setting the stage for consequences that had yet to fully reveal themselves. The soft clatter of footsteps echoed down the hallway as Lily Harper moved toward the study, the sunlight catching the dust in the air and casting a warm glow over her focused expression. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of the ventilation system, the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath her polished shoes, and the faint whisper of silk curtains brushing against the tall windows. Her gaze shifted to Charles Whitman, who was leaning slightly over the desk, scanning the pages with an intensity that made the atmosphere feel charged yet restrained, a quiet anticipation hanging between them. Eleanor Harper stood near the doorway, her posture rigid, arms crossed, eyes narrowing as she observed Lily, a mixture of curiosity and restrained irritation flickering across her features. Lily held the folder firmly, feeling the weight of the knowledge contained within, knowing that one wrong move could undo the delicate balance she had stepped into. She took a measured breath, letting the soft scent of polished wood and citrus cleaners ground her, focusing her mind on the details that mattered most. Her fingers traced the inked lines of the delivery schedule, noting a misalignment that could create significant issues if left unaddressed, a detail overlooked by every adult in the room. With calm resolve, she lifted her head and spoke in a clear, steady voice. There is a section here that requires immediate adjustment to ensure the proper sequence of tasks for the day. Her words cut through the quiet, subtle but firm, demanding attention without raising her voice. Charles looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a spark of recognition, the first acknowledgement of her insight breaking through the veneer of authority and routine. Eleanor's expression softened imperceptibly, her initial amusement giving way to curiosity as she leaned slightly, waiting to see what would unfold. The golden light of morning shifted across the room, highlighting the precise alignment of the pages Lily had indicated, casting delicate reflections across the polished surface of the desk. The staff moved around them with a hushed reverence, each motion deliberate, aware of the tension building in the study yet not interfering, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the unfolding revelation. Lily stepped back just enough to allow the room to absorb the weight of her statement, her posture confident, poised, yet non-intrusive, a presence that demanded consideration without arrogance. Charles slowly moved the papers, aligning them with careful attention, his gaze flicking to Lily again, registering the subtle precision and intelligence she displayed. Eleanor shifted slightly, her lips pressed together, a thoughtful line forming as the realization sank in that the quiet young woman who had seemed invisible moments before was now the center of attention, her observation and clarity creating a shift in the room that could not be ignored. The sunlight through the tall windows continued to illuminate the room in slanted beams, highlighting the subtle movement of dust and light, emphasizing the gravity of the moment, and leaving the room suspended in a quiet anticipation, the air thick with unspoken acknowledgement and the beginning of a new awareness that Lily Harper was no longer merely a shadow in the mansion. Charles Whitman straightened in his chair, the polished surface of the mahogany desk reflecting the soft morning light streaming through the arched windows. Eleanor Harper leaned against the doorway, her fingers tapping lightly against the dark wood paneling, the rhythm of her movements echoing faintly. Through the still room, Lily Harper held the folder with a quiet firmness, her eyes scanning the study, noting the alignment of every item, the subtle placement of decorative objects, and the trajectory of light across the marble floor. She felt the weight of observation, the kind that did not demand attention but commanded it nonetheless, and allowed herself a small, measured breath, the scent of citrus polish mingling with the faint aroma of old paper in the folders. The room was heavy with anticipation, every motion deliberate, as if the air itself had slowed, stretching the moment into a fragile space where the next decision could ripple outward. Charles's hand hovered briefly over the papers, his gaze sharpening, shifting between the entries Lily had marked and her calm, steady demeanor. Eleanor's eyes followed, a flicker of surprise breaking through the composed mask, her lips pressing together in a line that betrayed her curiosity. The staff around them moved quietly, almost imperceptibly, their presence a muted contrast to the intensity building in the center of the room. Lily took a subtle step closer to the desk, careful to maintain a respectful distance, yet close enough to make the misalignment she had noticed impossible to ignore. Her voice, soft yet firm, cut through the silence. If these entries are not corrected, it could affect the timing and coordination of all scheduled activities for the household. The words hung in the air, each syllable resonating with precision, drawing immediate focus from Charles and Eleanor, the gravity of her observation impossible to dismiss. The golden beams of sunlight shifted across the room, catching in the edges of the folder and the faint lines of dust on the polished surface, illuminating Lily in a way that seemed to mark her presence definitively, no longer invisible, a figure of quiet authority. Charles leaned forward, tracing a finger along the lines she indicated, nodding slowly as comprehension dawned, while Eleanor's posture relaxed slightly, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement of the correctness in Lily's assessment. Lily's pulse remained steady, her attention unwavering, as she observed their reactions, understanding that the subtle power of truth often spoke louder than words or status. The distant tick of an antique clock marked the passage of seconds, amplifying the tension in the study. Each tick a reminder that observation, patience, and careful articulation could shift the dynamics of a room built on hierarchy and routine. Light danced across the polished floor, catching the folds of Lily's uniform and highlighting the deliberate calm in her movements, the poise in her stance, signaling that her presence was no longer to be overlooked. The mansion, for all its grandeur and authority, seemed momentarily suspended, the usual rhythm interrupted, as Charles and Eleanor processed the significance of the detail she had revealed, the potential consequences, and the unexpected insight brought forward by a young woman who had been quietly present, observing and waiting for the moment to act. Shadows shifted slowly across the tall windows and the walls, stretching with the sun, accentuating the focus on Lily as the center of awareness, marking a transition from invisibility to undeniable recognition, the calm before the next step that would ripple through the household, unseen yet inevitable. Lily Harper took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the quiet weight of the study settle around her, as if the air itself had thickened in response to her presence. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, scattering across the dark wood floors and reflecting in subtle prisms from the crystal chandelier overhead, creating a soft halo that seemed to follow her movements. Her gaze shifted briefly to Charles Whitman, who now leaned slightly forward in his chair, his hands resting on the edge of the polished desk as he studied the pages she had indicated with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Eleanor Harper remained near the doorway, her arms crossed, yet her posture had softened, the sharp lines of disapproval giving way to intrigue, as though she were trying to reconcile the unexpected clarity in Lily's observations with the hierarchy she was accustomed to enforcing. The staff moved quietly around the room, their motions muted, almost reverent, acknowledging the subtle shift in authority without breaking the rhythm of the household. Lily adjusted the folder in her hands, feeling the smooth edges beneath her fingers, and allowed her eyes to trace the minor inconsistencies she had noted, the details that had gone unnoticed until now, each one a quiet testament to her attentiveness. Her heart rate steadied, each beat a deliberate echo in the grand room, matching the soft hum of distant conversations and the faint tick of the antique wall clock. She lifted her head and met Charles's gaze, noting the subtle narrowing of his eyes, the small furrow in his brow that betrayed both concern and growing respect. Eleanor's lips pressed together thoughtfully, and Lily sensed the shift. The invisible thread of influence she carried, though silent, had begun to reorient the focus of the room. She spoke again, her voice calm and precise. Correcting these entries now will prevent larger disruptions later today and ensure the household operates smoothly. The words hung between them, steady and firm, each one an anchor in the tension that had built over the last several minutes. Light continued to move across the floor, highlighting the contrast between the warm sunlit areas and the deeper shadows cast by the tall bookshelves, emphasizing the sense of depth and presence in the room. Lily took a small step backward, her posture relaxed but confident, allowing the attention she had drawn to settle fully upon the implication of her observation, the realization of authority that came from insight rather than position. Charles leaned slightly to one side, his hand brushing across the papers, scanning them again, while Eleanor's gaze lingered on Lily, a quiet acknowledgement in her eyes that the young woman had not only noticed what others had overlooked, but had done so with composure and clarity that demanded recognition. The soft murmur of the staff as they moved about their duties created a subtle rhythm, underlining the stillness in the study and the significance of the moment. Shadows stretched and shifted as the sun continued its ascent, casting dynamic patterns across the polished surfaces, lending a sense of cinematic tension as if the room itself were attuned to Lily's poised determination. The mansion, usually so ordered and predictable, seemed momentarily suspended, the hierarchy softened by the undeniable fact that a quiet observer, once unseen, had now subtly, irrevocably, drawn attention and respect, setting in motion the unseen consequences that would ripple outward from this one careful, deliberate intervention. Lily Harper felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the study as she remained poised near the desk, her eyes scanning the slightly misaligned papers with quiet intensity. The sunlight had moved higher, spilling across the dark oak floors and illuminating the subtle dust floating in the air like tiny golden specks, each reflecting a fraction of the tension that had quietly built in the room. Charles Whitman leaned forward, his hand brushing along the edge of the folder Lily had placed, his gaze sharp and deliberate, tracing the lines she had marked with an analytical focus that betrayed the first hints of recognition for her attention to detail. Eleanor Harper's posture softened imperceptibly, her arms relaxing as she studied Lily with a mixture of surprise and curiosity, the rigid composure she had maintained giving way to a realization that the young woman before them was not merely performing routine tasks but observing with an insight that demanded acknowledgement. The subtle hum of the ventilation and the distant ticking of the wall clock seemed to underscore the stillness, creating a suspended space where every small movement felt amplified. Lily's fingers traced the inked lines again, confirming her observations, each movement precise, deliberate, and calm, contrasting with the barely perceptible tension radiating from the adults in the room. She lifted her head, meeting Charles's gaze directly, her voice steady yet carrying the weight of authority beyond her age. These entries, if not corrected, will cascade into scheduling conflicts for the entire household. Adjusting them now will prevent errors and maintain order. The words were soft, yet the clarity and certainty embedded in them made the room hold its breath. Charles's eyes flicked to Eleanor briefly before returning to the folder, his eyebrows slightly raised as he absorbed the significance. The sunlight shifted across the tall windows, catching the edges of the papers, highlighting the precise alignment and small discrepancies that had gone unnoticed, creating an almost cinematic tableau of attention and realization. The staff continued their quiet movements, their awareness of the unfolding moment subtle but present. Each shuffle of shoes and soft brush of hands over polished surfaces punctuating the growing acknowledgement that something significant was occurring. Lily stepped slightly back, allowing the moment to settle, her posture confident yet unobtrusive, embodying the quiet authority of one who had noticed what others had overlooked. Charles leaned forward, scanning the folder once more, a slow nod forming as comprehension settled in, while Eleanor's lips pressed together thoughtfully, her gaze fixed on Lily, silently conceding the correctness and importance of her observation. The soft reflection of sunlight on the polished surfaces highlighted the contours of the room, accentuating the shift in awareness, as the mansion itself seemed to pause in recognition of Lily's presence, the subtle power of knowledge quietly reshaping the dynamics that had been so rigid moments before. Shadows lengthened slightly across the floors and bookshelves as the morning progressed, the quiet movement of air and light emphasizing the shift from invisibility to undeniable attention, leaving the study suspended in a moment where perception, precision, and calm determination quietly commanded acknowledgement and respect, marking the first turning point in a day that had begun with routine but now carried the weight of revelation. Lily Harper felt the subtle tension in the study shift as Eleanor Harper's gaze lingered on the folder she had placed on the desk, her posture no longer rigid but filled with a measured curiosity that suggested the first cracks in preconceived notions. The sunlight angled through the tall windows, catching the edges of the polished wood and casting elongated patterns across the floor, highlighting the small details Lily had meticulously observed. Charles Whitman moved slightly, leaning forward in his chair, his fingers brushing along the smooth surface of the desk as his eyes scanned the lines she had indicated, a mixture of incredulity and dawning recognition in his expression. The room remained quiet. The usual hum of the mansion softened to a hushed reverence as the household staff continued their routines with subtle awareness, each shuffle and step echoing the importance of the moment without intrusion. Lily shifted her weight slightly, maintaining her composed stance, her fingers still resting on the folder as she allowed the clarity of her observation to settle across the study. The warm light highlighted the careful alignment of the pages, the small inked notations, and the contrast between her deliberate composure and the growing acknowledgement of her presence. Eleanor exhaled softly, her arms unfolding as she leaned against the doorway, eyes fixed on Lily with a mixture of surprise and recognition that the young woman had discerned what others had overlooked. Charles's eyes flicked up to meet Lily's, a faint nod of respect evident in the subtle tightening of his jaw and the slight lift of his brow, the acknowledgement unspoken but unmistakable. The quiet tick of the antique clock on the wall marked each second as the study held its collective breath, the gravity of Lily's intervention radiating through the room. She drew in a measured breath, her attention scanning the details once more, ensuring that nothing had been missed, and the sunlight caught the slight sheen of the folder, giving it a soft glow that mirrored the heightened awareness around her. The mansion's vast interior, with its polished floors, high ceilings, and rich furnishings, seemed momentarily suspended, as if the very walls had registered the shift in dynamics caused by the precision and insight of one observant young woman. Lily's posture remained poised and firm, every movement deliberate, signaling that her presence, once considered insignificant, now carried a quiet authority that could not be ignored. Eleanor's lips pressed together thoughtfully, the subtle relaxation of her shoulders betraying an acknowledgement of the weight of Lily's observation, while Charles continued to review the folder with careful attention, a slow understanding dawning in his eyes. The light shifted again, shadows stretching across the floor and walls, accentuating the contours of the room and the figures within it, lending a cinematic quality to the quiet yet profound change taking place. Lily stepped back slightly, allowing the moment to breathe, her calm composure a stark contrast to the soft ripple of realization passing through Eleanor and Charles, the mansion itself bearing witness to the subtle transformation of perception and recognition, a silent acknowledgement that the observant presence of one young woman could quietly alter the course of attention and influence within its walls. Lily Harper stood in the center of the study, the soft morning light streaming through the tall windows casting elongated shadows across the polished floors and the edges of the dark oak bookshelves. Every detail of the room seemed to settle around her, the hush of the staff moving quietly in the background and the subtle creak of the floorboards amplifying the suspended tension. Charles Whitman leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing with careful consideration as he reread the lines Lily had pointed out, tracing his finger over the folder as if to confirm the accuracy of her observation. Eleanor Harper shifted her weight against the doorway, her arms now relaxed, and her gaze fixed intently on Lily, a quiet acknowledgement flickering in her expression that this was more than a simple correction. It was an insight she had not anticipated. The soft hum of the mansion, usually just background noise, seemed to underscore the intensity of the moment, the air thick with unspoken realization. Lily's posture remained composed, steady, each movement deliberate, her presence commanding attention without a word of confrontation. She allowed her eyes to drift briefly across the room, noting the meticulous arrangement of objects and the subtle interplay of light and shadow, aware that the calm precision of her observation had drawn focus from both Charles and Eleanor. A gentle draft stirred the curtains near the tall windows, causing the light to dance across the polished surfaces, highlighting the edges of the folder and the subtle discrepancies in the pages she had marked. Lily spoke again, her voice measured, precise, and calm. Addressing these entries now will maintain the intended flow of operations and prevent disruptions that could affect multiple areas of the household. Her words settled in the room with quiet authority, resonating with clarity, each syllable weighted by accuracy and insight. Charles's gaze shifted from the pages to Lily, a flicker of respect passing across his features, the first indication that he recognized her attentiveness and competence. Eleanor's lips pressed together thoughtfully, her expression softening further as the realization dawned that the young woman before them was not merely a bystander, but someone whose attention to detail and calm decisiveness had altered the dynamic of the room. The sunlight continued to shift across the study, catching in the facets of the chandelier and illuminating the subtle textures of the folder and desk, accentuating the focus on Lily as she maintained her poised stance. The mansion, with its grand ceilings and polished floors, seemed momentarily suspended, the usual rhythm and predictability giving way to a delicate awareness that a previously unnoticed presence had subtly redirected attention and influence. Lily's eyes remained steady, observing the small changes in posture and expression, aware that the acknowledgement of her insight had begun to reshape perceptions, shifting the balance in a household accustomed to hierarchy and routine, marking a quiet but unmistakable turning point. Lily Harper noticed a subtle change in Charles Whitman's posture, the slight lean forward of his shoulders and the narrowing of his eyes, signaling a growing attentiveness as he reread the entries she had highlighted. Eleanor Harper had stepped a little further into the study, the soft sway of her stance suggesting a reconsideration of her initial impression, the faint crease of surprise lining her forehead as she processed the meticulous observation Lily had presented. The sunlight through the tall windows shifted, illuminating the polished wood floors and casting intricate patterns of light across the folder in Lily's hands, highlighting each carefully marked detail. The room seemed to hold its breath, the distant ticking of the antique clock on the wall punctuating the quiet, while the staff continued their movements with measured restraint, each shuffle of feet or soft clink of silverware emphasizing the gravity of the moment without interrupting the focus. Lily adjusted her stance slightly, letting her eyes move from the folder to Charles, noting the subtle indications of recognition in his expression, the first acknowledgement that her insight carried weight beyond her role. Eleanor's lips pressed together thoughtfully, her gaze locked on Lily, a silent understanding forming as she recognized the accuracy and significance of the observations. The light shifted again, catching in the crystal of the chandelier and glinting off the polished surfaces of the desk and folders, creating a delicate play of reflections that mirrored the unfolding attention within the room. Lily spoke again, calm but resolute. If these misalignments are not addressed promptly, they could create a chain reaction affecting the coordination of multiple departments today. Her words floated in the space, precise and deliberate, drawing the focus of Charles and Eleanor fully toward her, each syllable reinforcing the importance of her notice and the clarity of her reasoning. Charles leaned slightly, tilting the folder to follow her indication, his eyes scanning the entries with renewed concentration, a subtle shift in his posture revealing a dawning respect for her discernment. Eleanor's arms relaxed completely now, the initial tension melting into quiet curiosity and acknowledgement, her gaze steady on Lily as the realization settled that this young woman had not only observed the details but interpreted their significance accurately. The study, with its high ceilings and grand windows, seemed momentarily suspended, the usual rhythm of the mansion's activity held in a delicate balance as the recognition of Lily's insights spread subtly through the room. Shadows lengthened and stretched across the floor, following the movement of the light and accentuating the contours of each figure within the study, lending a cinematic weight to the quiet transformation taking place. Lily remained poised, her presence calm, deliberate, and unobtrusive, allowing the acknowledgement of her correctness to settle without a word of insistence, the atmosphere thick with the quiet power of truth quietly observed and presented. The mansion itself seemed to lean in, every polished surface reflecting the shift in perception, the subtle authority of one observant young woman beginning to alter the balance in a household built on routine and hierarchy, marking the first step in a ripple of awareness that could not be ignored. Lily Harper felt a sudden, subtle shift in the room as Charles Whitman's eyes widened slightly, his hand pausing mid-motion over the folder as the clarity of her observation fully registered. Eleanor Harper, standing at the doorway, leaned in imperceptibly, her posture relaxed now, but her gaze sharp, a quiet acknowledgement passing through her expression that the young woman before them had unveiled something neither of them had anticipated. The sunlight through the tall arched windows caught in the crystal chandelier, scattering fragments of light across the polished wood floor and reflecting softly off the dark leather of the desk chairs, giving the entire room a suspended, almost ethereal quality. Lily held the folder steadily, her hands calm, her posture upright, each subtle movement measured, as though aware that even the slightest shift could alter the perception of authority in the space. Charles's fingers traced the margins of the paper she had indicated, a slow nod forming as comprehension dawned, his eyes lifting to meet Lily's with the faintest hint of respect beginning to replace prior indifference. Eleanor's gaze lingered, thoughtful and precise, absorbing the implications of the observation that had pierced the routine of the mansion, her previous amusement replaced with a cautious attentiveness. The air seemed heavier, filled with the quiet resonance of understanding, as the distant ticking of the antique wall clock punctuated each second with gentle insistence, mirroring the careful pacing of Lily's own thoughts and movements. Shadows stretched along the bookshelves, and the polished floors reflected the subtle motion of the characters as they processed the significance of what had been revealed, lending a cinematic weight to the stillness. Lily's eyes scanned the room once more, noting the micro-expressions, the slight furrowing of Charles's brow, the softening of Eleanor's lips, evidence of a recognition forming that extended beyond the simple correction of a logistical error. She spoke again, measured and calm, her voice carrying naturally through the quiet study. The alignment here directly affects all subsequent operations. If this is not corrected, it will cascade into errors in the daily schedule. Her words resonated, precise and deliberate, and the space seemed to lean in, the mansion itself acknowledging the shift from routine to insight-driven attention. Charles nodded slightly, his hand moving decisively to reposition the pages, confirming the accuracy of her observation, while Eleanor's expression softened further, her initial skepticism replaced by an unspoken appreciation for the quiet authority Lily had demonstrated. The staff continued to move around the room with quiet efficiency, aware but unobtrusive, their subtle motions emphasizing the gravity of the moment without breaking the tension or drawing attention away from the exchange at the center of the study. Light continued to shift as the morning progressed, catching the edges of the folder, the polished desk, and the scattered reflections across the floor, accentuating the presence of Lily as a focal point of observation, precision, and influence. The mansion seemed suspended, the usual rhythm held in delicate balance as the acknowledgement of her insight reshaped the attention of those present. The once invisible young woman, now undeniably central to the unfolding awareness of authority and recognition, marking a turning point in the household where observation and intelligence quietly commanded respect. Lily Harper stepped back slightly from the desk, her eyes steady on Charles Whitman, who now rested his chin in his hand, staring thoughtfully at the folder before him. Eleanor Harper had moved closer to the tall windows, the sunlight casting a warm glow across her profile, highlighting the subtle tension that had begun to fade as comprehension replaced initial skepticism. The room felt heavier, the quiet hum of the mansion emphasizing the weight of reflection, each second marked by the gentle tick of the antique clock on the wall. Charles exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since Lily had spoken, his mind turning over the implications of her observation, considering how easily he had overlooked what now seemed glaringly evident. Eleanor pressed her lips together thoughtfully, her eyes scanning the alignment of the documents again, as if reconciling the realization that the accuracy of a young woman's notice had prevented a cascade of potential missteps within the household. Lily held the folder firmly but without tension, aware that she had set in motion a quiet shift, one that required patience and observation rather than assertion, allowing the recognition to settle naturally among the adults. The sunlight moved slowly through the windows, highlighting the textures of the polished floors and the subtle patterns in the rug beneath the desk, the shadows of the tall bookshelves stretching and contracting as the day advanced, mirroring the transformation in the atmosphere. Charles leaned back slightly, a reflective expression crossing his features as he reviewed the pages again, the meticulous attention of Lily now acknowledged, his previous assumptions gently challenged by the clarity and precision she had presented. Eleanor's eyes softened further, a silent nod of understanding forming as she observed the poise and accuracy Lily displayed, recognizing that her presence, once deemed inconsequential, now carried weight in the dynamics of the household. The staff moved with subtle efficiency around them, their quiet motions underscoring the gravity of the situation without intruding, each shuffle and adjustment punctuating the stillness that had settled over the study. Lily allowed herself a small, controlled breath, the citrus scent of the polish in the room, mingling with the warmth of the sunlight, grounding her as she observed the slow shift in demeanor from both Charles and Eleanor. Every detail, from the gentle flicker of light across the polished surfaces to the soft hum of distant activity, seemed amplified in her awareness, emphasizing the subtle power of accurate observation and careful communication. Charles tilted his head, scanning the folder one final time before meeting Lily's gaze, a faint smile of acknowledgement beginning to form, the kind that spoke of respect earned quietly rather than demanded loudly. Eleanor's hands folded lightly at her front, the earlier rigidity replaced by a thoughtful ease, her acknowledgement of Lily's insight unspoken, yet clear in the line of her shoulders and the focus of her eyes. The room, bathed in shifting light and filled with quiet reflection, seemed suspended in a delicate balance, the mansion itself absorbing the recognition of a young woman who had turned careful attention into authority, her presence subtly reshaping the awareness and respect of those who had once overlooked her. Lily Harper felt the subtle shift in energy as Charles Whitman straightened in his chair, a small, reflective nod acknowledging the significance of the detail she had revealed. Eleanor Harper stepped fully into the study now, the morning sunlight streaming through the arched windows catching in the polished floors and creating soft reflections across the dark wood desk, illuminating the precision of Lily's observations. The folder lay open, its carefully marked pages catching the light, each line a quiet testament to the clarity and accuracy that Lily had brought to the room, a stark contrast to the previous assumption that she was invisible. The mansion seemed to breathe along with the moment, the distant ticking of the antique clock and the faint hum of activity beyond the study underscoring the weight of recognition settling in the air. Charles's eyes scanned the highlighted entries once more, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth as comprehension deepened, the earlier rigidity, in his posture softening into thoughtful acknowledgement. Eleanor's lips parted slightly, a subtle exhale betraying her understanding, her previous skepticism replaced by measured respect for Lily's insight and deliberate calm. The sunlight shifted again, casting long, angular shadows across the polished floors and reflecting in the facets of the chandelier above, accentuating the quiet gravity of the room as each detail of the study became part of a larger tableau of awareness. Lily remained poised, standing upright with a composed presence, her hands resting lightly on the folder, allowing the acknowledgement of her meticulous observation to settle naturally without the need for further assertion. The staff moved gently in the background, their soft footsteps and muted tasks providing a quiet rhythm that emphasized the stillness and focus of the central figures in the room. Lily's eyes followed the subtle microexpressions on Charles and Eleanor, noting the flicker of understanding, the slight tilt of the head, and the relaxed tension in their shoulders, all indicators that her quiet intervention had initiated a transformation in perception. Light danced across the room, illuminating the polished surfaces of the desk and floor, emphasizing the contrast between the calm of her presence and the previously rigid dynamics of authority, highlighting how careful attention to detail could command acknowledgement without the need for confrontation. Charles reached slowly for a pen, making minor annotations on the highlighted pages, his fingers deliberate, measured, acknowledging both the accuracy and the timing of her input. Eleanor shifted slightly, her gaze softening as she studied Lily, the acknowledgement in her posture, an expression clear yet unspoken, a testament to the subtle influence Lily had brought to the space. The mansion's grand interior, with its soaring ceilings, expansive windows, and polished floors, seemed suspended in quiet reflection, as if the room itself had recognized the shift from invisibility to respected presence. Shadows from the tall bookshelves stretched across the floor, the sunlight moving imperceptibly as time passed, lending a cinematic quality to the acknowledgement and quiet empowerment that now filled the study, marking the moment. When Lily Harper's careful observation, patience, and composure had irrevocably altered the perception of those around her and the rhythm of the household itself. Lily Harper stood in the soft glow of the late morning sun streaming through the tall windows, the light catching in the crystal chandelier above and scattering faint prisms across the polished wood floors. Charles Whitman leaned slightly back in his chair, his expression thoughtful and measured. The weight of recognition settled on his shoulders as he considered the precision and insight Lily had brought to the study. Eleanor Harper remained by the doorway, her arms relaxed, eyes fixed intently on Lily, the subtle acknowledgement in her posture signaling an understanding that had quietly formed over the last several minutes. The folder lay open on the desk, its carefully marked pages illuminated by the sunlight, each line a testament to Lily's observation, composure, and attention to detail. The mansion felt unusually quiet, the soft hum of activity in distant rooms a gentle counterpoint to the stillness in the study, creating a suspended moment where the shift in perception hung palpably in the air. Lily's stance was steady and composed, hands resting lightly on the folder, the calm authority of her presence underscoring the quiet power of accuracy and insight. Charles's eyes met hers briefly, a slow nod forming as comprehension deepened, a faint, almost imperceptible smile brushing the corners of his mouth as the realization of her contribution settled fully. Eleanor's gaze softened, her lips pressed together thoughtfully, the rigid expectation that had defined her demeanor earlier now replaced by quiet appreciation. Sunlight moved across the room, catching on the edges of the folder, reflecting faintly off the polished desk, and highlighting the subtle lines of dust in the air, giving the moment a cinematic depth. The staff continued their quiet movements, their awareness of the unfolding acknowledgement present yet unobtrusive, each shuffle and soft footstep punctuating the calm gravity of the room. Lily's eyes swept the space one final time, noting the softening expressions, the subtle acknowledgement of her presence and insight, and the careful balance of respect and curiosity that now filled the study. The high ceilings and grand windows of the mansion seemed to amplify the significance of the moment, the light and shadows tracing the contours of each figure, emphasizing the transition from invisibility to undeniable recognition. Every detail, from the gleam of the polished floors to the gentle sway of the curtains in the draft, contributed to a sense of stillness and quiet empowerment, a tableau in which observation and intelligence had quietly redefined authority. Lily took a measured breath, the warmth of the sunlight and the faint scent of polish grounding her, aware that the acknowledgement she had earned had shifted the dynamic of the room permanently. Charles adjusted the papers with deliberate care,